afternoon. So thank you for joining our At the Helm, the Role of Leadership in Health Anchor Work webinar. My name's Dominique Allwood. My background is in public health, and I have two roles at the moment, working both in the NHS as a Director of Population Health, and I am also the Chief Medical Officer of UCL Partners, one of the academic health science networks. And I work very closely with the Health Anchors Learning Network and the Health Foundation NHS England on this work. As you join, please do pop yourselves into the chat and say hello. We're in a slightly formal setup, which is webinar, so you won't be able to come off mics and we won't be able to see you waving at us, but in lieu of that, please pop your names and where you're working and what you're sort of working on in the chat. We're hoping that will be quite an active place for us to have a running commentary for those of you who want to do a bit of moxum on the side in the chat bar, also for anyone that wants to share resources or contact details, but mainly it will be your chance to also ask our fabulous panelists some questions. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce them, but a few housekeeping pieces. So the first one is that we do really want you to submit questions, so please keep those coming throughout the session. If you have a specific speaker you want to address those to, then do mention them, but otherwise I will be in the role with Jahan helping to try and field those out, and it's really supposed to be a community feel, so please do. This webinar is kindly hosted by the Health Anchors Learning Network. For those who haven't been part of our events or network before, it's a free UK-wide network for people who are responsible for, leading for, involved in or interested in anchor work, and this provides sort of spaces and opportunities for people to come together. And we've had a number of these events and some great resources that have come out of that. And so there's a wide range of people from different backgrounds that include NHS, local authority, voluntary sector and others. So please do say hi, and hopefully you'll get to see virtually some interesting people. We really recognise the importance of leadership in this anchor work. In fact, I was on a panel recently where someone said, how important is the role of leadership for ... And it wasn't this. And I said, I think leadership's important for pretty much everything we do. And so not least at all anchor work, and in many ways, never more so important with all the complexities that it involves across organisations and systems, working in different ways with people and communities. So it's wonderful to be having such inspirational speakers who bring a wealth of experience, both within direct anchor work, but also lots of things that span that agenda around tackling social determinants of health, population health, social and economic development from health and non-health sectors, and experience of leading organisations, systems and being influential. So I'm not going to do their bios justice at all. I'm not going to do some awkward Bridget Jones trying to introduce them all. You can read for yourself, and many of you will know them, but just very briefly, we've got Lord Victor Adebowale, who's currently Chair of NHS Confederation, and he's going to be presenting some of his sort of national experiences around this agenda. He has lots of other roles as well, but wonderful to have you, Victor. We've also got Dame Jackie Daniels, who's CEO of Newcastle upon Tyne NHS Foundation Trust, who will be giving the organisational perspective of what it's like to be an organisational leader in this space. And then wonderful Salma Yaqoob, who's Programme Director for Health Inequalities, Birmingham and Solihull ICS, who's going to be bringing an ICS perspective in. So I think you'll agree, some great different levels of organisation, system, national and breadth of different sectors and experiences that all of these people bring. So I'm doing a slight double act with Jahan. In a moment, she's going to be helping us just very briefly hear about some of the collation of insights that the Helm has brought together under what we're calling the leadership product, before we come to our fantastic panelists. But Jahan, you're going to keep me right here. Is there anything I've forgotten in the housekeeping, in true daytime TV, sharing the sofa spirit here?
No, that's absolutely perfect. Thank you for a great introduction, Dom.
Wonderful. I'll hand over to you, Jahan, to give us a quick, brief framework, and then we will get into the meat of the session.
Fantastic. It's wonderful to see so many of you here today. We're reaching almost 100 of you in the audience today, which is brilliant. And I think that's definitely because we're speaking about such an important topic. So what you can see flashed up on the screen now is a learning product which the Health Anchors Learning Network pulled together last year, actually. And this was focused on answering the question, what does it mean to lead an anchor mission effectively? And actually, how we did that is we pulled in learning from our Helm events, a number of which had happened over the course of a year at that point, and also our closed learning sets, where we had almost 80 individuals coming together over 4 months to speak about their work and actually move that work further and progress it in terms of their anchor aims and missions. And we pulled all that learning together to help us understand how leadership can support the furthering of anchor ambitions in organizations, and how individuals can actually lead this work themselves. So what you'll see on the screen is 4 key themes that we pulled out around leadership, and it's really focusing on what is needed from those leadership positions in anchor organizations, or helping you to reflect on points of strength and areas of need or development if you are in a leadership position. And before we get started on looking at those in depth, we want to spend some time reflecting on those 4 building blocks. It's worth mentioning that when we speak about leadership of anchor work, we're not just speaking about those in specific roles. There are some roles that are useful to mention, like non-executive and executive directors, CEOs, and then mid-level or frontline managers, all included in that answer of leadership. But we're also speaking about leadership across an organization, and that sometimes doesn't look like traditional leadership roles like you might think of. And what we hope to do by speaking about leadership in that way is develop this joined up approach across an organization that produces real anchor impact. So that's really what we're speaking about. So I'm just going to move into giving you a quick understanding of those 4 building blocks, and you'll see them on the screen now. And we've zoomed in on that leadership product, which is on our Helm website. And you'll see that the 4 building blocks are titled intentionality, the first one, shepherding culture change as the second one, system leadership as a third one, and the last one, facilitating culture change. And I'm going to deep dive into each of these in a moment, but what you might see from reflecting on those 4 specific topics is that it's a huge job to make this change in an organization towards anchor work and towards anchor working. So definitely not an easy job to take on if you're part of an anchor mission in your organization, and that's why it's helpful to pull out some of these key areas that you can focus on in terms of leading this work effectively. So the first one, intentionality, and what we're really speaking about here is the ability to consciously adopt an anchor mission. And the reason why we might want to consider that is because it does signal the beginning of a change towards a new way of working in an organization. And I think most importantly, it gives permission to staff to invest their time into anchor work, into work that might be really important for them and in line with their values. And it's a structural approach as well, which organizations might choose to take, anchor organizations, by designating an anchor program manager specifically. And although that's not always the approach that's taken, that can help to increase the speed of progressing your anchor program overall. And it can also help to have someone who's central to spreading that intentionality around the anchor movement. And the key thing about intentionality is it really does require clarity throughout an organization about the intended benefits and outcomes of anchor work. And that will be from senior leadership throughout the organization. So that clarity should filter through to give the impression that we are really intentionally moving forward with this anchor mission. So our second building block is thinking about shepherding culture change. And this one is to encourage that thinking anchor mindset. So it's about think anchor throughout the organization. And what we're speaking about here is embedding anchor approaches into day-to-day operations, into day-to-day work, and also decision-making processes. So what you get is the anchor culture spread throughout your organization. And that really does require strong communication with staff members, with the whole organization. That's vital. And what that does is over time helps to build up to a wider culture of thinking anchor first throughout your organization. Now, I know that might sound a bit abstract, so I'm just going to give you a few tools that you might keep in mind when you're thinking about shepherding in culture change towards anchor work. And these might be sessions like lunch and learns, conversation clubs, or newsletters. And all of those might be focused on spreading some of the anchor culture change, or equally speaking about anchor actions that you're taking, and helping that spread throughout the organization and building up that enthusiasm, that collective enthusiasm towards this work. Now, the third building block is system leadership. And very simply, this one is about coming together with other anchors and giving power to align behind shared goals. I think this one's really interesting and important because it does signal a very different way to work. And you might see this come to life through charters or work that's happening at the ICS level, or even collaboration with partners like universities, councils, housing associations, organizations that are already very much engaged in anchor work locally. And we've also seen this grow over the last year, maybe slightly longer, with the growth of regional and ICS anchor networks. And what we're seeing as a result is the driving of local work, especially where an approach can be scaled to benefit the local community at a larger level. So we really do start to see the benefit, the very tangible benefit of moving towards system leadership when you're engaged in anchor work, and how that can scale the impact you're having across a region or your local area. And then just heading towards that last one, talking about facilitating culture change. And this is about embedding that do anchor approach. And this is about doing the work. And what we're speaking about here is granting permission and support, really, to embed the anchor mission into day-to-day jobs, into day-to-day work. And you might see this come to life through champions in the organization, anchor champions, where they're really given permission and support to lead anchor initiatives that align with their interests or passions. And it's important to know that culture change is never a set of individual projects or a set of individual actions, but it is building that anchor mindset into policies, strategies, and the work we do across an organization to really build that up. And the end goal with facilitating that culture change is to raise the profile of anchor work over time. So that was a quick tour of our leadership product, and I'm going to pop the link into the chat if you'd like to take another look at that afterwards. But right now I'm going to pass back over to Dom, who's going to introduce us to our first speaker.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, John. Before we do that, I just want to flag a couple of things that have come up in the chat. So the first thing is asking about slides. All of the outputs of these meetings, the recordings, etc., do become available. So do check out the Helm website for that. And wonderfully role modelled by Lynn. Lynn's put some bits about what she's doing around anchor work and asking people to get in touch if they're interested. So please do feel that the chat is part of your extended community. Do pop in things of interest that you're wanting to seek help on or happy to showcase, because there is a huge little black book that's growing as we speak online. So it's with great pleasure that we've got Victor with us, who's extremely busy and does a lot of roles, but really we're hoping that Victor's just going to give us a bit of an insight into the leadership angle around this anchor work and wider agendas from the national perspective, and his insights in that. So Victor, over to you, and you've got about 10 minutes. I know you're not using slides, so I'm sure you're just going to tell us your thoughts and stories. So over to you.
Yeah, I was asked to just give a personal view, I guess, on this work. I'm a bit hardcore about all this. I don't think it's a choice for the future of the NHS and social care system. I don't think there's an option not to adopt the kind of leadership that we're going to talk about in relation to anchor institutions. I just think it's the new way. The alternative, it's a bit like the old public management approach to change in public services versus things like human learning systems. You know, one is the past, the other's the future, you know, and basically what you need to do is get with the program, because you're unlikely to succeed if you don't. So that's that's where I'm coming from. You know, the definition of a anchor institution is defined by the Health Foundation, is a large-scale organisation whose long-term sustainability is tied to well-being of the population they serve. Duh. I mean, that's the NHS. I can't think of an institution that operates in a community that isn't reliant on the well-being of that community for its existence. And indeed, the very fact that we have to make the point says something about how far backwards, in a sense, we've got to. You will hear from Jackie. I feel I'm a warm pat for Jackie, who's also my vice chair at the Confed, and I visited Newcastle last week, and I was deeply impressed by what I saw, because, you know, the problem with some of these things is that they can become really theoretical really quickly. And one of the ways in which I've noticed the NHS doesn't change, the way it absorbs change, is that it adopts language really well. So some of you will have noticed that over the last year or so, everybody's talking about system this and system that and system leadership and system, because that's the new word. What they do is they adopt the language. What they don't do is change behaviours, because change fundamentally is about a change in behaviour, which, by the way, aligns with my definition of what leadership is as difference from management. Management is the allocation of resource, the most important being time. Leadership involves the investment in your emotions for an outcome, which is why it's unlikely leaders will be taken over by machines anytime soon. Operating as an anchor in a system requires leadership, requires the emotional investment. So what I saw when I went to Newcastle is, and I'm not saying this to embarrass you, Jackie, but I saw an example of someone who is in charge of an anchor institution by definition, right? I mean, you know, what Jackie runs is a massive health provider, both in the acute sense, and it could have just stuck to the acute sense, but in terms of what our predecessor did, which was build an empire, and what Jackie inherited, which is a system. And she could have ignored everything outside the hospital gates, basically, just said, not my problem, or tried to own them through a kind of empire, you know, an alignment, not an alignment, but a subjugation, which sometimes happens. But what she's actually done is ask some questions about what the players in the system surrounding her are for. So what you'll see is the work that's been done with the local authority to engage them in the delivery of social care. What you'll see is all the players round the table with the community in the middle. Similarly, and enough about Jackie, because I'm embarrassing her because it's a bit of hero worship, but similarly, if you go to West Yorkshire and Harrogate, you'll see the chief exec of the ICS there, Rob Webster, doing similar kind of work, resulting in shifts in the way that they look at their elective care list. I think they were the first to disaggregate it and look at it in detail. Now, this, for me, these are all examples, and you'll see in all these places, not just the anchor institution being applied to health organisations, but to non-health organisations. Why? Because those leaders understand that unless you've got health in all policies and health in all practice, they will simply fall over with the demand from not doing that. And that's particularly the case where you've got large disparities between different groups in a community, which exist throughout the country. So I come back to my original point. If you are a provider of healthcare services in a community, by definition, you are an anchor institution. Now, this notion of being large or small, it seems to me, is for the birds. My view is that you can lead from anywhere in a system. All you have to do is introduce the system to itself. And that means asking questions. And the first questions you need to ask are of yourself. And I say this because I'm a real proponent of system leadership, which is the significant requirement, it's the absolute requirement for a leader who perceives themselves to be an anchor institution. And I won't, because I've only got 4 minutes and 21 seconds left, but I would encourage you to read an excellent paper by Peter Senge called The Dawn of System Leadership, which I'm sure some of you have read, and if you haven't, you should, because what it does is that it starts with you, and all leadership starts with you, ultimately. It starts with you asking the question, why am I here? What is it that we are trying to achieve? Which speaks to the intentionality point. You will note that there are many processes in the NHS that lead nowhere. They are like Hogwarts, stairs that go nowhere, rooms of requirement that contain everything, but not the thing you need. And what system leadership does, I think, it requires the leader to ask the question of him or herself as to what it is they are for in this system, and to start asking questions of themselves and then the system. You do not require the whole system, and this is particularly important for anchor institutions, because I've met people who are attempting for anchor institutions who fall over because they try and get everyone to agree. You don't need everyone to agree. You need one person to agree with you, and then to demonstrate the possibility of what can be achieved by working with you, and then others gather. But they only gather if the outcome is visible. So what you find in the NHS is that people gather around an idea, write a paper, produce the paper and think that is the action. No, the action is changing the experience or outcome for patient citizens. And if you can work with one other person to do that, then you will have achieved the start of system leadership, because others will see it and want to follow. So in the last 2 minutes and 38 seconds, I would say the following things are required, and I can't draw this, but it's based on the formula, the change formula, which starts by saying that change is equal to discomfort. Gleicher-Becker change formula is change is equal to discomfort times a vision times a credible first step, all of which has to be greater than resistance. Now that, for me, is a definition of an anchor institution, an anchor institution's leader's journey. It is not in one leap you are there. It is in one conversation with yourself, you start the journey and you invite others to join you. And that means that you are, it's interesting actually, that what I'm finding, and this is just en passant, I'm finding more women capable of doing this kind of work than men. And I think it's because men have to struggle with positional ego, i.e. egos given to them, if you see what I mean, by their positions. I also think that it's a real challenge for the NHS, which is often treated as though it's a pyramid. The fact is, no matter how good the chief executive of the NHS is, she cannot tell and cannot direct what happens in Newcastle from Skipton House. And therefore, it requires a different definition of what leadership is within the NHS in order that we can deliver better services for those people who are reliant on it. There isn't a plan B. Just to be clear, there isn't a plan B. We either get this right, or I think the NHS is in trouble. So it's system leadership, it's anchor institutions by default, not by choice. And I'll end it there. Thank you. 37
Wonderful.
Seconds to spare.
You're a pro, we can tell that anyway, but absolutely wonderful. Thank you. A masterclass in leadership there. So many nuggets. I'm sure people were furiously scribbling notes, references, etc. This entreated to us about it's not a choice, and the focus on systems is really important. If anyone does want to join the conversation or start the conversation on Twitter, do use the hashtag @Helm, HALN_UK. I'm sure there were many significant things you'd like to share with the nuggets that Victor gave. Thank you so much. We'll come back to you in the questions a bit later, but if that has prompted something in you, then please start thinking about what you might like to ask Victor. It's an amazing opportunity to be able to put questions to him. So do pop some things into the chat and we will come back to them a bit later. So the next one is, in a moment, I'll be introducing Salma, then we will have a little interlude with a little bit of interaction, and then Jackie, and then a good chunk of time for Q&A. So Salma, thank you so much for being here with us. You're going to give a bit more of what it's like to feel like you're working in the ICS system at the moment, all the things that are coming down around health inequalities and the work you've got to do around population health and anchor, etc. Give us your perspective of what it's like being a leader in your system now.
Thanks, Dominique, and thanks for the wise framing there, Victor. I was certainly one of those ones who was scribbling notes with those fantastic quotes. So I'm Salma Yaqoob. I'm the Programme Director in Birmingham Solihull ICS for Health Inequalities, a huge responsibility as well as a huge privilege. So we can go to slide 1 just for a bit of context where if people aren't familiar with us, and by no means will I expect people to read all those bullet points, but we're actually the most deprived ICS in the whole country. So when it comes to our core 20 population, for example, we don't have the luxury of getting our magnifying glasses out and finding out, well, to really say, well, who are these most deprived people? Almost half of our population come under the 20% most deprived in the whole country. So it's huge swathes of our population. So this is our main kind of business. You know, it's not like an add-on or something that we can do more in depth with just a small part of our population. So for us to do this as business as usual is a huge challenge. So when we talk about systems, that for me was a real opportunity. So, you know, you can either look at it as, oh, we've got another shake up, oh no, or, well, what's the opportunity in this? And given the fact that we are also the youngest population, not just in the country, but in Europe, which should be a huge asset, but sadly we also have some of the highest infant mortality levels. We're blessed to be one of the most diverse ICSs in the country. In fact, even this slide is now slightly dated because we now have the census data from 2021 published in the last few months. We're actually Birmingham, which is one of the largest place here. We've got 2 places, Birmingham and Solihull, but Birmingham is now actually an ethnic majority city. And it so happens that a lot of the overlap between deprivation and ethnicity when it comes to mapping, sadly there's a huge overlap, but it's not a complete overlap. We of course have communities who have historically been here from white communities who also face a similar level of deprivation. So when we look at the intersectionality, when we look at the fact that we have a really high proportion of people with long-term conditions, when we look at deprivation, when we look at ethnicity, we have a huge range of challenges. And of course, COVID-19 really hit us very hard. And as with many other systems across the country, it was a new thing, but it certainly highlighted entrenched inequalities. Next slide. So we actually developed, and we've already got this past our board, a 5-year health inequalities strategy. And I'll give you a quick overview of those 6 priorities were. But for the purpose of the webinar today, what was key was, first of all, identifying out of the many possible priorities, 6. And the main, I think, prize was actually getting agreement around those 6. So we've heard talk about relationships, partnerships, that being the key. So the process itself of making sure that we'd engaged with our partners, with our communities, with the local authority, as well as within the NHS itself, which is a massive job. People just think NHS one thing, but we've got all our providers, we've got our GPs, you know, that's a mission in of itself. And for us to make sure that we were prioritising in a way that would really help us tackle some of those entrenched inequalities was really important. So if I just give you a quick snapshot without going into detail what the 6 priorities are. So maternity care and infant mortality, better start for our children, better prevention, detection, treatment of major diseases, better outcomes for people with mental illness, better outcomes for people with disabilities, including learning disability, and improved outcomes for inclusion health groups. No shocks or surprises there, I imagine, for anybody on the webinar. But for us, the detail behind this was looking at our actual statistics and coming up with metrics for our localities for these areas. I'm seeing in the chat, did you include voluntary and community organisations? I'm going to come on to how we, in terms of the structures for us, actually important. Although it sounds boring, structure and governance for me has been my friend, because otherwise it's always the same people getting burnt out. And for me, it's how do we actually use the potential, the structures, the resources that we have to make this genuinely sustainable, and having our voluntary and community sectors is very much part of that. So from the outset, when I helped to construct what we call our Health Inequalities Stakeholder Board, the voluntary and community sector were and continue to be very much part of that. Now, when you come to the building blocks, and I hope that also addresses the issue of communities in our voluntary sector, So the next slide. Thank you. So whilst I said no surprises in terms of priority areas, and I'm sure systems across the country would share many of those priorities, for us getting right how we do this to ensure that those priorities are actually met was a key discussion, and hence, insight and impact using the data to identify the drivers and consequences of inequalities. We know that our own data isn't complete. So the fact that we're saying we're committing and assigning an SRO, senior responsible officer, who in our case happens to be the chief medical officer, to have responsibility to make sure that this happens. So all the work around population health management, for example, so that bleeds into pathway improvement. So to get away from pilotitis, where we get some good projects, the money runs out and then it's lost in the midst of time until somebody else repeats the idea, but it doesn't actually change the pathways. So we acknowledge that that's a key enabler for us to actually ensure that any positive changes, anything that we know actually can work and does work, that we make this part of a new pathway. And again, having assigned SRO for that. Prevention programs, we know absolutely not possible unless they are genuinely culturally appropriate, co-designed with our citizens, and so that we ensure that we embed prevention work at every level in our system and our pathways. And we have our public health directors very much involved and in fact leading on that. And I'll come in the second half of my presentation with some specific examples of working with our communities. But just to note that, for example, in our board, one of the first things that we've done since we've been on a statutory footing is ensure that we pay our community members who are part of our boards. Even setting up that framework was an easy thing. You think this stuff has been done, but we can talk about partnering, we talk about equal value, but for me, it's about acknowledging the power differential. So often we've had the attitude that it's almost like we expect people to be grateful that they're invited. People within our own system obviously would turn up to work without getting paid for it, but we don't often give that same value set, same acknowledgement of expertise to our third sector and community partners. So that in terms of how we're structuring ourselves, how we do what we do, for me is as important as what we do. So the Anchor institution, which is this was included from the outset, acknowledging that we cannot do what we do unless we have an approach of seeing ourselves and acknowledging the power that we have as an institution, as an ICB, but also our constituent partners and how they as individual organisations have that power. So for us, acknowledging, for example, that we need to increase opportunities for employing people from our most deprived communities. So looking at the wider determinants of health, again, no surprise to people here. We know the evidence shows that really about 20% of health is determined by clinical healthcare type approaches. 80% of health is really made up of the wider determinants of health. And the NHS, whilst primarily it may have a certain focus, and absolutely right, there's an increased acknowledgement that there is a responsibility, beyond those pure clinical services. And so the fact that we have huge, for example, vacancy problems at the moment, but aligning that to potentially recruiting from those people who are impacted most by health inequalities, that has not happened in a conscious way. And an example I'm going to share is our ICANN project, where we're going back doing exactly that, recognizing our procuring power, the fact that there's a huge return on investment when we procure locally. Again, we haven't necessarily thought like that within the NHS. It's always been about yes, value for money, but not seeing that in the broadest sense. So we've now got work, for example, saying that whilst when we employ people locally, when we procure businesses who may be slightly more expensive, but in terms of social value, and in fact actually keeping the pound in the local economy in the medium to longer term, that's how we're going to tackle the causes of inequalities, not just the consequences of inequalities. And we're on that kind of thorny journey of committing to the real living wage, which again you think was already done and dusted, but when you start really getting down to the detail, some organisations, whether it's a leadership issue, whether it's fear, haven't necessarily committed to it, and just being able to share examples of how other similar organizations who will share similar challenges have been able to sign up to that kind of commitment, you know, it is really helping with that nudge. So absolutely can't wait for everyone to be signed up to everything. Sometimes it is about building a coalition of the willing and running to get some of those wins and building up the kind of momentum and energy and support, you know, from you know, some specific examples. So next slide, please. So this is just an example from us specifically, who makes up our Health Inequalities Stakeholder Board, who's been part of it. So it's our, you know, NHS providers, it's Health Exchange, you know, can provide that extra scrutiny. Health Watch, we've got some of our universities involved. We've got Citizens UK, the Community Foundation. We've got organisations like Birmingham Race Impact Group, who are very, you know, critical friends, looking at and throwing up challenge in this. And we are still yet to work up a systematic way to involve community groups. At the moment, it is, although, you know, we've got the places there, it's people who are there from the beginning, but working at frameworks of representation, that's some of the detail that we are still working through, and we acknowledge that other systems are probably ahead of us in that. But in terms of my role, I'm absolutely passionate and key to ensuring that we do that properly and we do that right. I mentioned governance is our friend. If I can just share with you what that looks like for us in Birmingham and Solihull on the next slide. So at the top is ICP, as with everybody else, the Integrated Care Board. So we have something called a People, Power and Health Inequalities Committee, which is, as you can see, tied into our governance, which reports directly into the Integrated Care Board. And that is made up of senior responsible officers, like the Chief Medical Officer, like our Chief Nursing Officer, who is Deputy Chief Exec, our Finance Director. So right, you know, so that leadership right from the very top, not just the usual people who may have been passionate about this, but don't necessarily have the authority and the resources to follow these things up. And that is, underneath that, we've got the Inequality Programme Board, which is operational stuff. But the really important one for me is the Health Inequality Stakeholder Board, which is where we get all of those, the breadth of involvement and voice, which is beyond the NHS and beyond not just the local authority. That includes housing input, that includes campaign groups like Fair Housing for Brum campaign, for example, feeding in people who are experts in retrofit, telling us what we should be doing and giving us ideas and, you know, opportunities for us to engage in conversations which the NHS wouldn't normally be involved in. So if I may very quickly share an example where I think, you know, I actually see our community organisations as our real anchor institutions. They're the people who are there, regardless of whatever changes may go on within the statutory sector. And what we've done here through a project looking at our pre-diabetic registers with our GPs, saying what could an intervention which is tailored. So there was a piece of work going into actually adapting. So because we saw, for example, in our figures, the National Diabetes Prevention Programme, very low uptake and very low completion rate. And certainly when it comes to outcomes, sadly, not much positivity to show for it, yet we keep throwing money at it. And it's just about, you know, get people referred. But our GPs are telling us it's not working for our populations. So the challenge was, and we invested some money from national pot into this. What would it look like to do something bottom up? And so we have this wonderful community organisation called Saheli, and these are people, mainly it's women led, and they work with the GPs to come up with a very different service, which involves not necessarily calling it a diabetes project, but actually that's what it addresses. And it's got people doing physical activity, people who've been normally written off as, you know, these people are not interested in that, engaged in changes in diet, but in a way that understands what people's cultural kind of experiences and needs are, and actually then sharing the data, knowing your numbers and linking that with the data to our GP practice, so we can see the changes month by month. And again, that was a huge challenge, you know, you can imagine with the information governance issues, but went and did that really detailed piece of work, and we're already seeing 400 people have come through this, really great outcomes, and we're ready to scale up to 4,000 people over the next year. And that's very much something that could not have happened without our community organisations, not just being, a partner around the table, but very much leading it, and for us to kind of be humble and show that curiosity and put our money and resources into saying, well, into believing and saying, well, okay, show us the way, and what can it look like? The next challenge for us is how we make that sustainable. The other example I'd alluded to earlier was the I Can project. So we set ourselves a challenge of ensuring that 100 entry-level job opportunities for people who are unemployed and young people from economically disadvantaged areas. So again, for years, we've got NHS jobs, but with all the best in the world, with all those structures and processes, actually, we were still having this massive gap. And so it's about, well, how can we do this differently? And again, when you say it, it doesn't sound like rocket science. Don't have forms, which require 20 pages to be filled in. A simple expression of interest can do, and it will do. Don't change the kind of interview process that we have kind of coffee mornings, have a supportive approach to people applying for these jobs. And we've already exceeded the 100 target, two times over, because the enthusiasm within the communities. And when we drop that mentality that certain groups and certain communities are hard to reach, but acknowledge that actually it's us, some the institutions and organizations have been hard to reach. And it's been a real win-win. On the one hand, we've got a workforce crisis. On the other hand, we have unemployment and disadvantage. And again, within fairly short timeline, by a little bit of focused effort, we're seeing huge benefits. And we're actually doing a piece of work to actually evaluate the return on investment in this. And just simply people getting jobs in those areas and spending in those areas, we already, within 6 months, able to exemplify that. So looking forwards, we now have a pipeline of job-ready people. So it started with one of our trusts in the main, but it's been expanded to other trusts. We're also expanding the kind of jobs, because it started with kind of admin and estates facilities, and now we're looking into, for example, theatre support type jobs. So a very practical, because I get when we talk about anchor, we can kind of stay in the theoretical space, it's all, let's just be nice to each other, partner inclusion, we say these buzzwords, but the messiness of doing it, having done this, it hasn't been easy. And I guess, in terms of lessons learned, would be, yes, structure and governance, whilst it can sometimes be seen as a bureaucratic nightmare, actually, in our case, I've been very intentional and conscious of using those to ensure that this anchor ethos is something that becomes embedded. We're still at the beginning of that journey. So, I sometimes look at envy with some, especially people, when we hear from our northern colleagues who seem to have done this, for quite a few years and are really well experienced. And I certainly, learn a lot from. But, I'm also really proud of, the steps that we have been taking and where we're getting. And another key aspect for this is not just our partnerships here on the ground, but when we kind of look at the region with our West Midlands Combined Authority colleagues and leveraging that. So sometimes it's a nudge, sometimes it's a push, and sometimes it's a pull. But
Salma, on that note, I mean, you've been so inspirational. I've been loath to jump in, and I'm the clock watcher in timekeeping, but thank you so much. All of the things that you shared, I think, were just super interesting to people. It makes it feel so real, and it moves us much out of the theoretical into the sort of tangible and practical. And you've been very honest, and I think demonstrated a lot of your values through the leadership and the work that you're doing. So thank you. I'm sure lots of people will have questions for you, and indeed you've sparked a lot of chat, particularly about the community angle. So thank you. We'll come back to you in the questions. So if you've got questions for Salma, please do pop them in into the chat. But thank you so much for such a rich presentation. Victor's already asking for slides. So I mean, if Victor's asking you for slides, that's a wonderful sign of great work. So thank you. Listen, we're almost going to be handing over to our final speaker before we get really stuck into the Q&A, but a very quick interlude just to break up some of the presentations. We just want to hear a little bit from audience participation. So Jahan, over to you very briefly for a bit of Slido.
Fantastic. Well, how do I follow this brilliant presentations. That was hugely inspiring. And I love to hear those practical examples, as well as understanding how this works across a national perspective. Really fantastic so far. And now we're hoping that you might want to get involved and tell us a bit about how this works for you in practice. So I have popped a link into the chat. You can either click the link directly, or you can go to slido.com and you can type in the number, which is 1950325. And then the last option is just to use that QR code that we've got on the screen, which you can scan, and it will take you directly to that link. And what we would like is to hear from you. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to get yourself onto slido.com, where we're going to be using Slido to hear a bit more from you. And we love this opportunity to understand exactly what you're doing on the ground, and to understand how we could support you better in the future, and hopefully to learn from each other as well. So just a reminder, slido.com, the number is 1950325, or you can click that link.
And Johanna, we're going to be displaying a few results in a moment.
We are, exactly so.
So wonderful.
Let's move on to that first question.
Let's see, people's results are still coming in, I think, but we can have a look at how that updates live, can't we? You're in countdown corner. You're doing the numbers.
We are indeed. So the all of those results, I can see lots of you have been voting already. And this is on that question, do you have sufficient leadership sponsorship for your anchor work? And I can see that there's a bit of trouble with getting those up on the screen. So what I'm going to do is just pull those up on my side. So hopefully you'll be able to see that now if I take over sharing. So important question to understand where we're at right now. Do you have sufficient leadership sponsorship for your anchor work? And we can see that actually that's been a challenge for a lot of you. Maybe something which we're looking forward to tackling over the coming couple of months, and definitely gives us a sense of how much work there is to do in terms of building out leadership for anchor work generally.
And Johan, we've actually had a question from Abuzar. So heads up to the panel, this is the Klaxon alert. We'll be coming to you to think about how we position anchor work for executives and leaders to help sponsor, given all the current priorities. So that will be one that we'll be asking. So thank you for that.
Fantastic, and keep those questions coming. So this is a great insight into your work. I'm going to move us on to the next question, and that should pop up on your screen now. So you should be able to see that on your side. And what we'd like to ask you is, what has been or is your biggest challenge to securing leadership buy-in or sponsorship for your anchor work? Now, you might be in the 40% of the group who already have managed to secure that leadership. And if so, we want to hear your best tips. We want to hear from you how you did that, so that we can learn from you. And if this is an ongoing challenge for you, then what is it that's stopping you from gathering that support for your anchor work? I can see many of you typing, as you can see on the screen, already one answer around other priorities and how that can be quite conflicting sometimes. We hear that a lot from people across the network, that trying to align with priorities can be really difficult. Getting executive headspace, I completely agree, and I think that's very much linked with getting this top of the agenda. Wow, these are coming in super quick, keep them coming. I can see we've got some really interesting ones here around understanding from leadership. So you can see around the real living wage, how there's not that understanding at executive level at the moment. And some positive ones. So speaking about non-executive directors and how it can be great for them to bring in a broad range of interests. And I've heard examples of them bringing in really close connections within the community as well, which I think is very much welcome in this work. Keep these coming. We absolutely love these. And I can see that some of you are voting as well. So we've got some people mentioning priorities quite a lot. I can see that capacity, resource coming out as very much key themes here. definitely, those are challenges we hear about all the time. And I'll be interested to hear in the chat if any of you have faced some of those challenges and overcome them. How have you managed to align your anchor work with shifting priorities over time? And how have you managed to really secure that resource and investment, the capacity you need to move that work forward? So funding being an ongoing challenge. We've already spoken about understanding. And again, right at the top of the screen here, we see that there's been some positive examples of supportive leadership and system leadership as well. All right, so please do keep those answers coming in. And again, we would love to hear in the chat any supporting examples you have or any advice you might want to share. Brilliant. So I'm going to move us on to that final question on the screen, but you can keep voting on the last question if you want to. You can keep popping your answers in, and please do keep using that chat. The next question is about, there we go. The next question is about the top way that having leadership buy-in will benefit your anchor work. And what we're really thinking about here is, what is it that you want to achieve from getting that leadership buy-in? And we've heard from the panelists so far speaking about how this can be done in practice and some of the examples of what this is going to bring us in terms of benefits. And we really want to hear from you if you're doing this work, or if you are a leader who's leading this work, how exactly is that going to impact the anchor work? Brilliant. I can see many of you typing, but some immediate answers coming in. That permission that we spoke about earlier, really giving permission for individuals across the whole organisation to engage with this work. And I've seen a few people mention change and impact as well. So really sustained change. And also, I think Victor alluded to this quite a few times, keeping the community that you're impacting right at the heart of the work you're doing. So having real change that makes a tangible difference to your local community. Fantastic. So again, linking to those outcomes that you want to have, evaluation and how you can align that to priorities, communicate those priorities out to the organisation. Fantastic. And some themes coming up at the top. Yeah, so around change, we know that this is a really difficult change to make in an organisation. It requires a huge shift in mindset and in culture. And I can see that coming out, been mentioned already 10 times. And the resource or the capacity to actually make this work a very tangible benefit there. All right, fantastic. So we're going to leave the Slido open for a while so that you can continue to pop your reflections in, but please also do pop those into the chat if you have anything else to add. We absolutely love hearing from you. At this stage, Dom, I'll hand back to you.
Wonderful, Jahan. Thank you. Gosh, I haven't seen the Slido so active in a long time. What rich discussions. And as if by magic, many of those things are exactly the things that are probably top of the mind for leaders like Jackie as she carries out her role as a busy chief exec of an organisation, about how do you keep focus when there's the urgent things happening around you. So hopefully Jackie will touch on those in a moment. Just to say thanks for being so active on all channels. Gosh, it's really testing my facilitation skills. I've got Q&A, I've got chat, I've got Slido, so lots going on. Wherever you want to share your views and opinions, please do keep going with that. We really want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to have a bit of a virtual voice. So Jackie, without further ado, much to build on in what we've heard, but amazing leadership that you've demonstrated in this area, and great to hear from you now.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. What a fantastic conversation so far. So just a bit by way of background on me, and this is relevant really. So if we go to the next slide, Victor talked about whether we have any choice in this matter. I'm with him. I don't think we do. And I was really interested in his reflections about a build on what essentially is around self-development and learning over a career. And you can see a little bit of structure in terms of my career and where I've come from. And, you know, I've been a chief executive now for over 20 years. I'm privileged to be the leader in Newcastle. I've been there 5. one of the reasons I went to take this job in Newcastle was I saw the opportunity of working in a city region like Newcastle with some other really progressive anchors, and that I'm going to say a little bit more about that and give you some examples of the kinds of things we've been able to do. So next slide, please. So Newcastle is big. You know, many anchors, you know, are large. They don't need to be. I would agree with previous comments. I think it's about influence. I often talk about creating sticky edges, because whether it's industry, whether it's political, you know, government organisations that are trying to engage with the NHS, whether it's communities, what I'm often told is actually the NHS is often quite difficult to engage with. So I talk a lot within my organisation and with partners about let's create as many sticky edges as we can, because we're more likely to get traction. And this slide is really an attempt to show you where some of those sticky edges might be. So we are this specialist hub. We provide all the tertiary services for the North East and Cumbria. So our influence is pretty deep and wide across a whole range of services. But we've actually got 17, I think close to 18,000 staff now who all live and work within the city region, all who can create their own mini sticky edges out there. We spend a lot of money, you know, and we can choose how we spend that. So we've chosen to bend a lot of our procurement to local businesses, which obviously create jobs and wealth, which I believe in turn actually creates health. And so it's that lovely virtuous cycle. We've invested a lot in research and innovation because we believe that that in itself creates unique sticky edges with life sciences industry, and gives us actually benefit not just regionally, but nationally and internationally as well. So hopefully that's, you know, those sorts of areas illustrate to you just how much scope and breadth we have. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, this is, if you've been to Newcastle, you might have travelled on the metro. It's brilliant, actually. It's a brilliant way to get around. But, you know, we did some work with our university partners recently to look at life expectancy on the metro map. And it is absolutely shocking to see. You can see there, it's illustrated within 5 miles, 9 minutes travel time on the metro. There's a difference in 8.5 years of healthy life for that population. And it's absolutely shocking to me, you know, that 3 out of 4 children in our region, in our city, in poverty are from households where, you know, at least one parent is actually working. So we've got this scandal of kind of in-work poverty that we've really got to try and lift by creating better jobs with better wages. I noticed that somebody had made a point in the chat about living wage. We're about to move and actually pay the real living wage. We believe it's so important, and many of the other anchors in the city are already there. And if you look at I'm going to come on to talk about climate change briefly in a minute, but you know, the numbers there around just how many premature deaths in the UK are affected by air pollution. And at times, central Newcastle has had illegally high levels of traffic-related air pollution. So, you know, really, these are really big ticket items that we need to work on together. But let me now, in this next slide, just start to tease out for you. I think the Helm leadership framework is absolutely superb because it really does take you to the heart of how to lead an anchor organisation, provide anchor leadership. So intentionality is a lovely word and really helpful. We declared a climate emergency. In fact, we were the first healthcare organisation in the world in Newcastle to declare it. And I think this is really important because if you've got an intention to adopt an anchor leadership role, you have to somehow create things that can be visible from space. because it's really hard to get some of this on the agenda. Again, there's been loads of commentary about just how often we get crowded out by operational pressures or this or that. So we didn't declare a climate emergency because we got the best plan in the world to deal with it. We had a plan, but we did it because we wanted to kind of create a storm. We did it with intention. We used a lot of media and social media channels to talk about it and try to really work, particularly within the NHS, and encourage and work with other players, other boards that are doing some fantastic work. But, you know, the next slide probably illustrates, and again, facilitating culture change. This is really what it's about. It wasn't very hard. Once I sort of twigged this in Newcastle, the fact that a lot of our staff were very, very passionate about this whole agenda, I thought, do you know, not only is this a fantastic and important thing for us to be doing, because there isn't any health without planetary health, but my staff really care about this. So lots of our clinical teams, lots of staff from all corners of the organisation. And what I found was, as we started building networks of activity, and I think a lot of what we're describing here in terms of anchor leadership is creating more of a social movement with networks and networks of staff. I found it was really, really easy to just light, you know, lots of touch points and just allow it to flourish. So if you look on Newcastle's website, you can find a ton of stuff about this and about how we're doing it. But basically, we're embedding the culture shift. We're giving lots of permission. We're investing in things like hybrid posts and just creating the weather, pardon the pun, to make it happen. And we really, it's as alive today as it was when we declared the climate emergency nearly 4 years ago now. So the next slide talks about the third building block, if you like, which is really working well with others. This is about system leadership stuff. And previously, I think Victor mentioned this, Newcastle had a reputation for working really as a fortress. It didn't let many people in. We now try and be, you know, the best partner that we can be. And we formed what we call Collaborative Newcastle, which has got the universities, the two big civic anchors there, the City Council, also a couple of other trusts, mental health provider, business, community, voluntary sector, etc. And we've been working on this partnership for several years. And again, you can see a lot of detail on the website. What I would say about this is you've got to put the time and energy into leading this. You've got to really be prepared to put the hard yards in. We've put lots of structure in place, and Salma mentioned some of the structures that they're using. Of course, that formal governance is really, really important, but a lot of it is about convening, I think. And on the third bullet point, it talks about the joint leadership development programme. So I think we're in about our 4th year of 3 cohorts a year, a programme we set up with Northumberland University. And I love participating on this. I love meeting some of the project teams. So you get a GP working with a social worker, working with a local business entrepreneur, and they're talking about how to improve health, wealth and well-being in the city. And there is such a huge, deep connection between those platforms. And so they're modelling the leadership behaviours, and it's just, you know, actually being embedded more deeply with each cohort of teams that go on the leadership programme. So, and we try and celebrate as much as possible just what great work we can do together. We've got a massive programme of health and social care apprenticeships. We could never have done that alone as an organisation. We've sold a huge piece of land, actually had one of our hospitals on this site in one of the most deprived areas of the city, in the west end of the city. And we bought it back as partners, as anchors, and we're regenerating what we're calling the Centre for Ageing and Vitality. It'll be absolutely revolutionary in terms of what it can provide for our ageing population in the city, but it'll bring new business, enterprise and commerce along with it as well. So next slide, please. This is a lovely phrase, isn't it? Shepherding culture change. I love that. Just thinking anchor mindset. What can we do? And I love it when I hear back staff from all corners of the organisation talking about the health, wealth and wellbeing connection and the mantra, saying that actually as a big provider, we're doubly rated outstanding in Newcastle, but we've got some of the deepest health inequalities in our population. So that for me, on joining Newcastle was a real aha moment. And I thought, what have we been doing for the last, well, at that point, it was 35 years in my career as an NHS. What can I do in the next period to really make an impact there? Not just in providing great services in the hospital, but creating sticky edges to really take that beyond. So there's some lovely examples here, you know, the Academic Health Science Centre, you know, we champion that and we pledge for that, not just because it's a nice little badge to have on the front of the building, but because it brings in investable income, it creates more jobs, it builds confidence and competence in new research and translation of research and so on. During the pandemic, we decided, because we're a regional anchor and because we could, I guess, we built the biggest integrated COVID lab in the country. It was huge. We created 800 jobs. We just took the opportunity and really worked in the way that Salma was describing to try and recruit from the most deprived areas. A lot of those 800 people, although they're not working in the lab because we've closed the doors, they are working in the system. And it's been fantastic to see the growth there. And, you know, we managed to secure new money for development of biomedical scientists, they're like hen's teeth. And the innovation lab that we put in place as part of that is still running. And I was just reading one of my executive team reports for tomorrow, and that's generating £1 million worth of income this year. So, you know, that anchor mindset can really, really lead and yield some fantastic change. So I take no convincing that anchor leadership is really, really important. Of course, I've got to run a really great organisation, but what I can do across those sticky edges is really, really powerful. So I'm going to stop there, Dom. I hope that's sort of given a few examples, and I really look forward to the chat.
It has, Jackie, and I've heard your story a couple of times, but each time I hear something new, and it's just absolutely amazing to hear the progress you've made, and how you've really been able to codify and tell that story using our framework is wonderful, bringing out so many of the important points of that story, and the culture and the leadership really shines through. As Victor being the best agent I think you could have, he kind of trailed you already, didn't he, as we started. So what an amazing set of conversations, provocations, talks, insights from the panel. And also what a wealth of wonderful sharing is going on in the chat too. I don't feel like I actually need to add very much here, but we have had a couple of questions in, so I will make sure we get time to cover those. And I'm going to shepherd them out in a moment. So if anyone's got anything else they want to sort of ask, do pop those into the Q&A or chat, and we'll keep an eye on them. But I've got a few sort of building up, and Jahan, do feel free to share. So I'll just give a little run through so you can hear them, and then I'll see about fielding them out. So I guess one of them is about, can anyone be an anchor? We've heard a little bit about that, but I'm keen to hear the panel's kind of views on that. There's various definitions out and about. One about sort of positioning anchor to get the best sort of sponsorship at exec and board level. Jackie's already talked a bit about that, so maybe we'll hear from someone else. There's one about how you'll know you've been successful as an anchor leader. And then there's also one about, there's quite a spectrum of how well organisations and ICSs are doing this. So what we've heard some characteristics of leaders that really help this, but what's the difference that's making a difference? Some have really got out there and leading from the front, and others haven't even really got off the blocks with this yet. So some great questions. Let me see where to start. I guess, Salma, I'm interested in your kind of thinking around some of the answers to these questions, but one of them really is about some of the executives and boards buying into this, and you obviously sit at the ICS level. So have you found that the engagement has been quite universal across your partnership, or has it been something that you've seen that's been quite variable, and what's some of the reflections that you've seen around that?
I think the reality is it does also come down to individuals who happen to be passionate about certain issues and the energy they bring, and then you build up a coalition of the willing, which is why I think for the sustainable part of it, having structures and reporting mechanisms is important. So as an example, we know that one of the 4 aims of the ICS is, apart from improving health inequalities and population health management, is contributing to social and economic wider development. But I don't see it put into the KPIs of senior execs or indeed middle management. And I think that would be one way to actually ensure it starts to happen, because what happens is, when we put our quarterly returns, suddenly, oh, what we're going to say against that, and it focuses people's minds. And after COVID, we had the phase 3 letter where we had those 8 priorities, and since then Bowle and her team nationally, the health inequality, fantastic job. That's how we got the core 20+5 priorities, and now people are focusing, but the 8 went down to 5, and the things that got dropped off from the 8 were anchor work and community development. And so I would advocate bring them back in, and just now that we've got this health inequalities team nationally, anchor work I see very much aligned to that, and now we've got structures for all ICSs to be able to give regular monitoring, however they might structure themselves internally. We happen to have a health inequalities team, other people have got transformation teams, you name it. But if we know we've got to put those returns in, then whether it's our estates colleagues, our finance colleagues, our CMOs, everybody's minds will be focused. So that'll be my kind of plea for next step to help make this sustainable, because there's a danger our own staff get burnt out with this stuff because it's so huge. But we do need the structures in place to support this to be sustainable going forwards.
Thank you, Salma. Thanks so much. And also lots of interested people want to hear more about ICANN, so I'm sure you'll be sharing details in the chat too. Victor, you went first, and now you've had the opportunity to listen to both Salma and Jackie's fabulous presentations, and I guess lots of reflections from you as well. So anything you want to sort of share on theirs, but that specific question about, given that this shouldn't be a choice and that we know what sort of needs to happen, why is there so much variation that we see? You have a sort of view that looks out on a number of different levels.
Yeah, my view is because we think it's a choice when it's a necessity. So that's my first comment. My second is the reason why I'm a fan of Jackie, sorry Jackie, I'm embarrassing you, but is because she demonstrated exactly what I said about system leadership. She started with herself. She exampled that by the showing what she found when she arrived and the questions she asked herself about what the system had been doing, what she'd been doing, and therefore asked about impact. And those questions of herself led to the questions of the system. That's harder to do than most people think. It's much easier to roll up and stand with your legs apart and get a lead guitar, but that's not what she did. So I wanted to comment on that. On Salma's excellent presentation, Salma, please send me a slide. I thought they were excellent and just really good practical examples that I'd like to just reference, if I may. Not that your slides weren't excellent too, Jackie, but I just really like the examples. Where I differ with you, Salma, is this notion of luck, that you just have to find people. I understand what you're saying and why you're saying it, but I think it should be a necessity. So I think what we should be saying to leaders in the health system is, in order to be a credible leader, you have to be a system leader. This is what it takes, and there are lots of examples. Jackie's out there. This is what you do. If you're struggling, this is the support that we can give you to become one. So it becomes a requirement across the NHS rather than a sort of, well, he's doing it because he's kind of into it. And then, and it usually is, you have to say that, or she's up for it, but they're not. And if you're lucky, and that's unfair, because what it means is that in Jackie's system and in Salma's system, you get an attempt at joining up, you get an attempt at system integration, you get the anchor leadership. But in others, if you're unlucky, tough. Well, that's not. And if you happen to look like me, that's just not acceptable. So my view is it's not a case of luck. It should be a case of expectation and support, rather than you know, lucky you, you've got Salma, or lucky you, you've got a Jackie.
Brilliant, thank you, Victor. I'm going to follow up with you, and then Jackie, I'll come to you in a moment. But we've had a question, and thank you to those who've put questions in the formal question section, Amy, Matilda, and Abu Zar. Thank you. As anchor thinking is becoming more prevalent, can any organisation become an anchor? And Salma was talking very much about community organisations being part of the sort of fabric of community, embedded in their communities, a bit like the definition you gave. What's your sort of personal opinion, Victor, about can anyone be an anchor? Is it only really those big institutions?
Well, I'm sure that Salma and Jackie got other view, but my personal view is no. I mean, I think it could be. One of the things I'm concerned about is the not-for-profit and the voluntary sector, and not for dividend, rather, voluntary sector, because what I hear from them is they're aware of this language, this debate happening in many systems, but they don't see any practical benefit in taking part. So what they do is they either, if they're large, focus on well, we'll just build more, we'll find a route into building more of X or Y and hope that that works, or, you know, find an in somewhere. Or if they're small, they're locked out because they're too small and don't have the time and the space to do anything. And I do think that more work needs to be done to encourage some of the not-for-dividends to become the anchor institutions. As I've said, the definition of an anchor institution is quite clear. An organisation can be large in its delivery, not necessarily in its size, and still be an anchor institution. It can be an anchor institution because in parts of the country, as Salma's pointed out, the notion of ethnic minorities is a misnomer. And there's maybe one organisation that's core to the understanding of ethnic minorities. Why shouldn't that be an anchor institution? So I do think that we need to just flex this notion of it always being the big guys. And I do think that, but it does, I have to say this, it's harder if you're small because you don't have the resource, the time, the most important one being time. You don't have the chutzpah. But it's possible to get the chutzpah. It's possible to see your role, and therefore to lead from anywhere. You know, to bring up the Jackies of this world and say, hey, you know, you should be doing this, and if you're not, you're missing out on delivering healthcare to a big chunk of the population. And if you carry on doing that, you're not sustainable. We can help you, but we need you to you know to follow or lead or get out of the way. You can't do nothing. And it's that kind of conversation I think is necessary.
Right.
So you get, sorry, just say this, you get anchor organisations that are universities, that are hospital trusts, that are, you know, whatever. The point is that they leave they check their egos at the door in the interests of better.
Yeah, thank you. Lots of nods there. And I guess this notion between sort of anchor organisations where they're the sort of big economic players versus an anchor mission and the intention behind what you're trying to do, whatever size you are. Jackie, a great question here, and you've touched a bit on your presentation, but great to expand. How do you know you're being successful in leading anchor institutions to have impact? What's the kind of things that will tell you that? And I guess both hard and soft probably in that answer, aren't there?
Yeah, so I think there are a number of ways you can position it, and I think in the early days, some of my measures were we were actually round a table. We co-created hubs around the city for our joint teams to work. So just having things like co-located teams was a big success for me. Good conversations between leaders, big success. We started integrating all our data across the city. So we've got a completely integrated, we call it from duplication to personalization, where we can look at lots of things. Those things were good measures. You know, we've measured job creation. They're currently measuring apprenticeships. So we've got lots of metrics. We tend to agree those, a bit like we would our annual plan within the hospital, you know, as we're building the picture for the year or the next couple of years. So I think there's so many ways you can cut this, and so many ways you can get into it. Yeah, but I think mutually agreed measures are critical.
Brilliant, thank you. Salma, I wanted to come back to ICANN. You gave so many granular examples of what you're doing to really think differently about how you work with communities and think about power. Lots of conversations I've had recently have been, how do we cede power? And people often start with, how do I even know I have power and what do I need to do to cede it? But a great granular examples. One of the tangible things you talked about was ICANN. We cut you off just before the end. Was there anything else you wanted to say about ICANN? And just before you do, it's the final warning, I guess, to say we've only got a few minutes left. So I'm going to ask all of the panelists to just give a summary reflection on anything they've sort of heard that's piqued their interest today, or reinforce things they're already thinking about, or anything they want to mention that they haven't been asked yet, the pet burning subject on anchor stuff. So it's your kind of panel choice for whatever you want to say or learn, or just anything you wanted to mention about the sort of the people power in relation to the ICANN, just because I know lots of people are interested in that.
Well, I'm happy to share more detailed slides around the ICANN, so anybody can, look at how that's happened. So again, I guess it's for us to go to where people are at, and that being a new thing for some of us in the NHS, and actually going forward, not just talking about those entry-level jobs, going even early into schools. So something I haven't mentioned, for example, is we're doing something where we're raising health literacy, for example, around asthma, doing clinics actually in schools where there's high pollution. So it's having, we haven't talked about schools as partners and anchor institutions in this, massive potential which is untapped, and we're determined to tap into. And actually to think about careers from a young age, because many kids tell us, well, we didn't know we could do that, whether it's being a photographer, somebody in for example, in comms, because what we do, whether it's estates, facilities, comms, admin, is not just about nurses and doctors, which is what a lot of people have the image about. And so again, filling that recruitment gap, but in a way which raises aspirations of young people, where that's kind of, it's a separate initiative. It's not the ICANN, but I just thought I'd throw that in there, because again, that potential is open to anybody, in any ICS, and missed opportunities. And it also means a closer relationship with our communities, because often you get some people who live in the communities, and for them that it's really easy when you think about it. But actually we found that the higher up we go, the idea of knowing how to do community engagement development is a skill in itself, and has a whole set of knowledge and how to do it, and those relationships, and they're not necessarily there, which comes down to, again, further recruitment down the line. How can we ensure that we recruit very consciously, asking that to be a skill set? And then it comes to, when I mentioned KPIs in the chat, when we hold ourselves to account on our objectives, how do we demonstrate that we've worked with our communities? If every manager had to kind of find a way to link their work to that, I think it means that the system as a whole gets to where it needs to be. Because sometimes the best of what we have is the system leaders get all those brilliant workshops, leadership opportunities, those training opportunities, but it doesn't necessarily filter down to middle or low managers or people on the front line who actually have to do that or aren't freed up to do it. So I would actually also advocate for a lot more training opportunities and development opportunities right on the front line, because that's where a lot of the magic happens. Not of absolute acknowledging you need that culture and system leadership at the top to enable that to happen, to give the permission for it to happen.
Super, thank you so much. So just wrapping up now, the sort of 30 to 60 seconds reflections for us closing, that's I guess really been focused on very much this leadership opportunity and challenge. Victor, I'm going to come to you next.
Well, just summarize what I've heard. Well, I've heard a lot of things. My view is, based on what we've heard, A, anchor institutions can be done. B, that it's possible to be done. That leadership's critical. You can't do it without shifting leadership, and that leadership involves, well, it starts with you. I'm afraid it's you, it's no one else. I would comment on something that Jackie said, which I think is really powerful. Is an example. I don't used to use the jargon, but how simple things make massive differences. So people think things like co-location or having a cup of tea together are kind of inconsequential. Actually, in complex adaptive systems, which is what you're running, these small things can make massive differences. So to coin a phrase, be the leadership you want to see, and the other one thing I would say is to those people who think that they don't have the time to think about this, I would retort that if you're not thinking, you can guarantee that no one else is.
That's absolutely spot on. Yeah, really good words to leave us on. Thank you. I'm sure many people will be pondering that. Jackie, any closing sort of reflections from you?
Just two things really. Firstly is that point about we're just on a journey of lifelong learning, and getting curious and having conversations like this just connects dots all over the place and helps us have more influence. The other thing that I don't think has come through as strongly, but has played a powerful, been a powerful partner in my work, has been the influence and the essential place that politics plays. And I'm mainly talking about local politics. And I've seen some fantastic work aligned to devolution deals. And yeah, you know, that can really make a difference if you can try and find that alignment with what local government are doing. It's so powerful.
Wonderful, thank you. And Salma, just the final words from you.
Oh, I thought I'd done my bit.
Well, then there you go. You've given yours. I just wanted to give you a chance. Well, while I've got 30 seconds more, then I might just quickly say that there's been one more question that's come in, just about thinking about that link across the sort of social value and community wealth building and things that the ICS thinks about in terms of its whole partnership that we don't always have in the NHS. One of the panelists said, I think it might have been you, Salma, that we often are a bit late to the table compared to others. So humility is the key. Do you agree? I mean, I'm not sure you're going to disagree in the final moments anyway, are you? Wonderful. Okay, well, listen, thanks so much to our panelists. What a fabulous group we've had, and some amazing personal insights and reflections. It really did feel like a sort of a leadership conversation, which I think is absolutely right and crucial for doing this difficult work. In a moment, we're going to just ask everyone who's joined to take 30 seconds to fill in our evaluation. Our speakers have joined us and given all of their time, and many people have put effort into organising this seminar, so we would love to hear your feedback. I just want to thank everyone for joining. Please do sign up to the Helm newsletter if you want. Do get in touch with each other and with us with case studies, questions and comments. Do download all of our resources, and make sure you do really keep in touch on this work. It's hard work. It's important to be doing it with other people, sharing the load, sharing the inspiration, sharing the pain. So thank you so much for joining. Please do fill in our evaluation. Wonderful. We'll leave people to do that. Thank you so much, panel. You are free to go now.